Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome to what I like to think of as the Mark Steyn garden party. There's so much work going on, I'm not even aware I'm at a party. Tonight we have a Boris defender for you on that subject. An American judge says the case against the Duke of York will be going to trial, so you won't be seeing His Royal Highness at any garden parties anytime soon. And what's the time lag between some obvious COVID misinformation being a crackpot conspiracy theory and then turning out to be true? We'll mull that with Matt Ridley. All that and the indispensable part of the show, your questions and comments. Let me know what's on your mind by email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or by tweet at gbnews. Stump the Steyn coming up. But first, as always, on GB News, whether it's on TV or radio, we start with the news. Here's Polly.
Mark, thank you. I'm Polly Middlehurst on GB News. The top stories this hour. Prince Andrew is now facing a civil sex abuse trial after a US judge today dismissed a motion by his lawyers to have the case thrown out. The Duke of York's legal team argued Virginia Giuffre relinquished her rights to sue anyone when she signed an agreement with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein in 2009. Miss Giuffre claims she was sexually assaulted by the prince when she was 17. He denies any wrongdoing. Lisa Bloom, a lawyer who represents victims of Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein, says she doesn't expect the case to be settled out of court.
All of these technical arguments that Prince Andrew has raised. First, he said he wasn't properly served with a lawsuit. Then he says it should be thrown out because of a prior agreement that he was not even a party to between Virginia Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein, that the court didn't have jurisdiction. I mean, all of these arguments are now rejected. I don't see Virginia accepting anything other than an admission that this happened and an apology to her and payment of a significant amount of compensation. And I just don't see him doing that. So I think he's going to continue to fight the case.
Lisa Bloom. Well, here the Prime Minister is under pressure to resign after admitting he did attend a drinks party during the first lockdown. Boris Johnson has now apologised and taken full responsibility for the event, which was held in the Downing Street garden. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, and other opposition leaders and a number of Conservative MPs say his position is now untenable. Mr Johnson says he believed it was a work event.
With hindsight, I should have sent everyone back inside. I should have found some other way to thank them. And I should have recognised that even if it could be said technically to fall within the guidance, there would be millions and millions of people who simply would not see it that way.
After months of deceit and deception, the pathetic spectacle of a man who's run out of road. His defence that he didn't realise he was at a party. It is so ridiculous that it's actually offensive to the British public.
Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, there ridiculing the Prime Minister in the Commons today. Well, in other news, a Met police officer accused of a series of sex offences has appeared in court to face a further 9 charges. David Carrick now faces 29 allegations, including 13 counts of rape against 8 women. He'll appear at St Albans Crown Court in just over 2 weeks' time. The rollout of smart motorways in England has been suspended over safety concerns. The Department for Transport says it follows several fatal crashes on the hard shoulder. New smart motorways are being put on hold for at least 5 years. On your radio, via DAB+, on TV and online, this is GB News.
Before we go any further, yesterday we got a question on the burning topic of the week, scones, jam and clotted cream, and I gave my answer, to which I feel I need to add an abject Boris-like statement. So that will be coming up later. Now to the lesser stories. As we know, the garden is where all the real work gets done, not just by the gnarled old head gardener who's been with us since 1922, but also his young, fetching, trusty under-gardener. But it's also by the Deputy Assistant Under Special Advisor on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Oh, and that conga line over there I see, I think they're working on a white paper about the Ukraine. So it's all very busy and very work-like. As I said yesterday, like anyone who has had any truck with Boris Johnson over the last third of a century, I find him entirely without morals or principles. Obviously, there is a certain counterintuitive genius in using an Etonian toff, Woodhouseian bluffer act to pass oneself off as a man of the people, and one must respect that. But it's the Prime Minister's lack of self-discipline that's got him in this mess, and possibly, as Michael Portillo was suggesting on this channel, a lack of basic empathy too. The aim of those disaffected Tories who are growing in number is to replace him with someone who can hold the red wall and keep their majority. But the aim of those who put this stuff on the front page of The Guardian and the headlines of the BBC is something bigger. They want to destroy Brexit, which is Boris Johnson's only accomplishment. Without it, he's just another loser, also-ran, no-name Prime Minister, keeping the seat warm until the next Blair or Thatcher comes along. There are a lot of those. We've had them for 11 years now. 11 Conservative Prime Ministers, and the country gets less Conservative every day. Boris was elected to get Brexit done, and it's not quite done. And the months ahead will determine whether Brexit gets done or whether the present deal winds up breaking the union. The status of Northern Ireland is intolerable to a supposedly independent nation. So the choice is between breaking the union or reducing the entire UK to a ramshackle client state of the Eurocrat empire, rather like a princely state in the days of the Raj or the Trucial states, for you fellows who remember the good old days. The rejoiners in the media, the judiciary, the civil service, all the levers of metropolitan power, the rejoiners haven't given up on their dreams of rejoining, and they see the removal of Johnson and the chaos that would follow as greatly assisting that. On the continent, Monsieur Macron and Brussels see it as vital that Brexit be perceived as a failure pour encourager les autres. And destroying the Johnson premiership is a first step in that. Now, this isn't to excuse anything the Prime Minister did. He's an idiot, and he should have known the minute he stepped across the Downing Street threshold that he would be surrounded by people out to get him every day of the week. The invitation was issued by a civil servant. He should never have issued it, that guy. But it's very typical of a phenomenon the last 2 years have made plain across the Western world. The people who make the rules for you do not regard the rules as applying to them. The trend predates COVID, but COVID has widened the gulf because our rulers have restricted the most basic of activities: socializing, strolling, getting a coffee from Costa. It's all over the world. The governor of lockdown California was seen whooping it up maskless at a fancy French restaurant. The premier of Alberta was boozing it up at a Downing Street-style party when his downtrodden subjects couldn't, at a time when picnicking was banned in Ireland. The topless Taoiseach, Mr. Varadkar, was besporting himself with similarly underdressed hunks around a big picnic hamper in Phoenix Park. The Speaker of the US House, Nancy Pelosi, one of the wealthiest women in America, got an illegal blowout in San Francisco at a time when California's hair salons were all closed down, because she's Nancy Pelosi and you're not. There will be a lot more of this in the years ahead. Increasingly, with or without COVID, we are moving into a post-democratic age where an hermetically sealed elite make rules for the rest of us and do not live as the rest of us. The difference is that no staffer of Nancy Pelosi or that California governor would ever have leaked memos of their private partying. And even if they had, neither the Washington Post nor CNN would have been willing to break the story, because they're all in the same club. For all his climate change hooey, Boris Johnson isn't. And it's incredible that he wasn't sufficiently self-aware to know that the insider license accorded to lefties and Europhiles would not be extended to him, and that if he behaved like Pelosi or Varadkar, some malevolent twerp would be only too happy to leak against him at the point at which it would do him maximum damage. It was, in that sense, an own goal. The question is whether, having crippled himself, he now winds up crippling the completion of Brexit. What do you reckon? Can Bojo turn this around? If you think he can, tell me. Tell me at gbviews at gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. We're going to come back to this story. You may have seen a couple of weeks back that the Duke of York filed a motion in US federal court to have the sexual assault case brought against him by Virginia Giuffre dismissed. Judge Lewis Kaplan today denied that motion, and Miss Giuffre is going to get her day in court. As a defendant with more experience of New York courts than I ever wished to have, I found the arguments advanced by the Duke's lawyers pretty darn feeble and borderline amateurish, but your mileage may vary. Mark Steyn joins us. He's done cases at the Privy Council, which is the highest court of appeal in the Commonwealth, and circa 1929 had ultimate jurisdiction over a quarter of the world's population. So if it weren't for the unfortunate events of 1776, the United States actually might come under the Privy Council, and things would be very different. Mark, that's true. Mark, I should say also you're a former president of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, and so you know better than most that the United States has diverged from the rest of the common law world in many interesting ways, in which things that go on in a New York court would not be recognizable in London or in Toronto or in Sydney or Singapore or all kinds of places. Are we actually going to? Yeah.
I think interestingly with this, Mark, you put your finger on it. You know, the Prince's lawyers were completely outgunned on this. David Boyce for Virginia Giuffre is one of the better lawyers in the United States, which makes him pretty good on a global stage. The Prince Andrew's lawyer was, frankly, I think, a hack by comparison. The problem that they've got is that up until now, the Prince's lawyers have done an analysis. Is Prince Andrew in a bad place? Yes, he is. Can we make it better? No, we can't. Can we make it worse? And the answer to that is most assuredly we can make it worse. And it's worse if he has to go and give evidence and to detail all the information that they want to know. Can he sweat? What was he at Pizza Express in Woking? And more importantly, what was it that he did with Virginia Joffrey? She makes allegations of sexual impropriety with a 17-year-old girl. That may not be a criminal offence. It's over the age of consent, but it's morally reprehensible in the eyes of most right-thinking people. And so Prince Andrew was already reputationally toast before today, but Judge Lewis Kaplan has now lobbed a judicial judgment bomb into the heart of the royal family, because he's essentially said, I'm not having out any more of these technical legal arguments. You may be entitled to make them as law. This is going to trial, and it'll go to trial by the end of this year, which means that it's going to potentially eclipse the whole of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. We want to remember the Queen for her service and all of those other good things. We want to remember our double bank holiday weekend, and we want to celebrate. We do not want to remember or have this year remembered as the year Prince Andrew went to court with Virginia Joffrey.
Well, those observances are due to start next month. And as you say, we're now in the pre-trial period for a trial that is scheduled for the end of the year. And under the system in New York, the other side have, whether or not he wants to actually testify during the trial, they have the right to depose him before the trial. And on the evidence of that television interview, if I were his lawyer, I wouldn't want His Royal Highness being deposed. Do you think the momentum is to settle this thing as quickly as possible? In other words, he's not going to go there. He's not.
Yeah, this judge has put Prince Andrew on the horns of a dilemma. Essentially, he's got a choice. He either goes on, which makes the whole thing irreparably worse, immeasurably worse, or he has to settle. I think the realpolitik of this is that before this case, this problem was confined to Prince Andrew and his reputation. He withdrew from public life, or was withdrawn from public life. But now, since they've taken this legal point, there's been a sea change in public opinion. People are calling for him to be stripped of his princely titles. People are examining his associations with charities. People are looking at his position as Colonel-in-Chief of, for example, the Grenadier Guards and other important regiments. And of course, that's an issue which is in the Queen's gift. So following this judgment tonight, what we have, I think, is crisis talks tomorrow morning at the palace. How do we stop this spreading? The only way to stop this spreading, and they will be taking the advice from the Prime Minister, from Downing Street, from the Foreign Office, from Privy Councillors, and of course the most senior advisors in the palace. This is a crisis, make no mistake of it, and it's a crisis that they haven't seen the like of before. Never before has a royal member of the royal family been accused of effective criminality in this way. So this is reputationally toxic. And Prince Andrew, the only way out of this is to settle. Now, he doesn't have that completely within his gift, because Virginia Joffrey could say, I don't want to settle. There's been a load of victim shaming here. I want my day in court. I want my vindication. But Prince Andrew has one card left to play. It's a kind of thermonuclear device in a legal sense. He can say, up until now, I've been coming to court and I've been taking these technical points. If you won't settle with me, what I'm going to do is allow you to get a default judgment against me. You will get the vindication that you want from your court, but you won't get any money because there's a quirk of law which most commentators are missing, which is that default judgments where Prince Andrew doesn't turn up, are not enforceable in this case. So she'll get vindication, but no money judgment. And I suspect her lawyers will want a bit of a money judgment, and so they will encourage her to settle. But it will be a pricey settlement. $10 million and above is my number.
I think you're absolutely right on that. It's going to be an 8-figure sum. You mentioned that this is unprecedented. We've learned a bit of what the Prince of Wales in the late 19th century and some of the other royal dukes got up to hither and yon. But they weren't dealing with a federal court in New York, which is applying New York laws on these matters, where it's almost impossible for any contact not to be sexual assault if the victim says it is. In other words, if she sits on his lap and he pats her kneecap, that's sexual assault under New York law. So the more details they go into on this, the more he's just digging the hole for himself.
Yes, he is. And I think this is the problem. So, Prince Andrew had hoped to rehabilitate his reputation at some point. I think he has to recognize that he's toast. He's reputationally toast. He's done. So the only thing he can do with any shred of honor is to ensure that his actions or the allegations against him don't infect or don't affect the royal family at large. And to do that, he has to settle it. And I think he's in the process of doing that. He's just sold his ski chalet for $18 million. Now, he won't clear $18 million. He'll have some debts and some mortgages to pay off, but he's likely to clear something close to $10 million. And I can see Virginia Giuffre's lawyer, who's a very smart lawyer, saying that $10 million's coming to me and Virginia Giuffre.
Yeah, you're right on that, Mark. The gulf between David Boies, who is, I don't find him, he's not the most likable chap, but he is a powerful and successful lawyer for a reason. And these hacks that the Duke of York wound up with, I don't know whether he was just looking, as entitled people often do, just for a couple of toadies, but they didn't serve him well in that New York court.
Really
Thank
did.
you very much for your... Thank you very much for your analysis, Mark. Well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more of this before that final settlement, though. This is GB News. Mark Steyn, we have a lot coming up for you, including your reaction to that and to Boris Johnson's current travails. Also, we have Matt Ridley on COVID origins, all straight ahead. GB News, TV and radio.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Let's get straight to your comments. Alan says, "Hi Mark. In my opinion, the party at number 10 is of no concern at all. The government are close to the information and they knew there was nothing to fear from social interaction. The problem, as far as I'm concerned, is that they told the general public that there was a problem and they had to look down." Yeah, this is, they had to lock down. This is correct, Alan. The fact is that the behaviour of our rulers is at odds with what they're telling us. We're all going to die. We've got to stay locked up in our pokey flats and go out for half an hour's exercise a day, and we can't do this and we can't do that. And meanwhile, what they're doing, when you see these pictures of Downing Street parties and whatever, what they're doing tells you that they don't believe their own panic porn. And that's actually makes it even worse, because it's not just like some entitled guy. They're both entitled guys, really, the Duke of York and Boris Johnson. But it's not just like some entitled guy carrying on in a way that you wouldn't be able to. It's him carrying on in a way he's expressly forbidden you to. John says, "Boris by nature is a chaotic character at heart, is still a schoolboy. And this has been part of his charm. But now, unless he grows up right away, he is toast." Look, he's at an age where he's not going to change. People who say Boris Johnson is going to change are not, a guy doesn't change at this age. He's who he is, and who he is has worked for him. Pete says, "Boris snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. In 2 short years, he's done nothing to deserve the reputation he creates for himself. Get him out and get a proper Tory in." Do you know any proper Tories, Pete? Can you find one for me? They're thin they're on the endangered species list. I'm surprised they didn't bring it up at COP26. I think climate change has actually managed to render what you call a proper Tory extinct. Just one of many species. That's why Boris is so terrified about climate change. It's wiped out all the proper Tories he once used to know back in the 80s when he was a young chancer. Roger says, "Whilst having no brief for Boris Johnson, I would like to know who actually leaked the news of Downing Street parties and why it took them so long." Well, I can tell you, having had Boris Johnson as my editor, I don't want to go into all that, but I would imagine that if you know the chaos Boris Johnson leaves in his wake, whatever they felt about him initially, within about 4 days of him crossing the threshold of Downing Street and moving in, there would be dozens of people who would all like to get him and are just waiting for the most opportune moment, which they did. Jeff says, "Hi Mark, I think you're spot on about the Ramonas having the knives out for Boris." Indeed. You know, they're serious. They think Brexit was an aberration that just weird people like Boris and Nigel managed to pull off. So if weirdos like Boris and Nigel can pull it off, then substantial, respectable people like the media, the judiciary, the civil service, they can reverse it just as stunningly and get Britain back in. And getting rid of Boris would be a good first step in that. Henrietta says, "Boris has no morals." I was going to say, I nearly said there, Boris has no models, but I don't think that's actually true. I think he's had quite a few. Boris has no morals and needs to go, and very quickly. The question is, who will replace him? Labour is not the answer. The Tories did a deal. They thought Boris, they knew Boris had no morals. I mean, he's the first Conservative leader to live with a woman in 10 Downing Street in the history of the Conservative Party, to live with a woman not his wife in Downing Street to live with a woman without benefit of clergy, as we used to say back when the Conservative Party had morals. But they did a trade-off. They thought it doesn't matter that Boris can't tell you how many children he has. He's the guy, he's necessary to getting Brexit done. So the Tory party put its morals in the deep freeze and said, wait, we're not going to be needing them for the next few years. So that's a difficult argument to make. But thank you, Henrietta, for standing up for the cause of morals in politics. You know, ever since Bill Clinton, we basically, morals aren't, he managed to, he's lowered taxes and he's done this and he's done that. Interestingly, we've given up on character in politics. As we saw today, there may be times when you need character and you need to get it back. Well, keep your emails and tweets coming. Stump the Steyn will be along shortly. As you know, we like to be your one-stop shop for Kazakh news. I love Kazakhs. They're fabulous cheekbones. Best cheekbones on earth are from Kazakhs. It's not a competition. You don't need to propose alternative stands. I'm just throwing it out there. Last week we reported that Kazakhstan was being roiled by a potentially revolutionary uprising. Now the regime is denying Russian media reports that its military biolab was seized by protesters. The Russians say that in all the excitement of seizing the biolab, there might have been a leak of dangerous pathogens. Curiously, this biolab is funded by the Pentagon. Wait a minute, didn't we do this story a few weeks ago? Some lab in a sketchy part of the world was receiving US funding to do gain-of-function research to make dangerous pathogens even more dangerous. Didn't we do that one? Oh, no, my mistake. That was the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where they've got more US tax dollars than infected bats. If you look at Wikipedia's COVID conspiracy theory page, even today, the first and original conspiracy theory they list is that COVID-19 came from the Wuhan Institute. However, in private emails now published in the Telegraph and other outlets, a lot of scientists give credence to the lab leak thesis. Here's the headline from the Telegraph. Scientists believed COVID leaked from Wuhan lab, but feared debate could hurt international harmony. This is an astonishing admission. The scientists, and this is one for all you conspiracy theorists out there, this is scientists in their emails saying, oh yeah, the COVID came from this lab, but we don't want to say that because it might hurt international harmony, whatever that's got to do with science. No one knows more about this than Matt Ridley. He's the author of the book Viral, the search for the origin of COVID-19, and we're delighted to see him now. Matt, just to get something out of the way first, we're now 2 years into this thing. It's if you look at SARS, whatever it was, 15, 16 years ago, the big SARS outbreak from China, generally with something like this, we know how it started, we know how it happened pretty quickly. It doesn't usually take this long, does it?
Correct. In the case of SARS, it was within a few weeks, really, that it was obvious that the people catching it were food handlers, chefs, people like that, and that the animals in the market where they were buying them were infected. We haven't found a single animal infected with this virus from before the first human case. 80,000 animals have been tested, just can't find it. In the case of MERS, the connection with camels became obvious very quickly. We have much superior technology these days, much faster sequencing, much better diagnosis and detection, and yet we don't know where this came from. 2 years in, that's pretty surprising. And one of the reasons, of course, is that the Chinese authorities have clamped down very hard, very early on, literally about 2 years ago this week. They issued an edict saying no scientist could communicate at all with social media, with anything. And of course, that meant that doctors and others weren't able to tell each other to watch out. There are dangerous cases coming into hospitals. So that let the cat out of the bag, let the pandemic develop. But it also meant that we got no direct information about where this came from, and it became more and more obvious that we needed to consider the possibility that the leading virus research laboratory doing work on SARS-like bat-borne coronaviruses in the world by a mile just happened to be in the city of Wuhan.
What's interesting about this, though, is not that there was a difference of opinion, but that basically establishment media and the political class, as well as the scientists, were so eager not to say, oh yeah, that might just be a long shot possibility, but actually to shut down and dismiss as conspiracy theorists. We now know from these emails that this was not a good faith objection to the lab leak thesis, but that these were scientists who were prioritizing some sort of international comity above the actual facts.
Yeah, this all concerns a weekend at the beginning of February 2020. 1st of February 2020, Sir Jeremy Farrar, the head of the Wellcome Trust, suggested that Patrick Vallance, Tony Fauci, Francis Collins and a bunch of virologists get on the phone to each other to discuss the alarming possibility that this had come out of a lab, the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab in particular. Because that's what Farrar and other virologists, that was their first impression on looking at the genome of the virus. They said it's got a furin cleavage site in it. No other SARS-like coronavirus has that. That's a bit odd. It's the kind of thing people put into genomes in labs to make viruses possible to grow in human cells. So maybe this is a feature that didn't arise naturally. And Farrar actually was quite forthcoming. I mean, he's the one who's really helped us here because he wrote a book called Spike, and in it he said, we had these worries, we had this meeting. After the meeting, we decided, no, we didn't need to worry about it anymore. Well, we've now got the emails that he and others sent each other the day after the meeting and in the days following, and they show a very different picture from what they were saying in public. In public, they were saying within 3 days, they were writing a paper which ended up saying any lab-based scenario can be ruled out. In private, they were saying, we think there's a 60-70% chance that this came out of a lab. And we can't find any natural explanation for these features in the virus. So it's not the fact that they had these concerns. They were quite right to have these concerns. It's the fact that they were saying something completely different in public from what they were saying in private. Now, we've known these emails existed for many months, but the Freedom of Information requests produced totally redacted emails. You know, dear Fred, blank, 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 yours sincerely, Joe. Well, the Republicans on the House Oversight Committee were allowed under some rule, which I don't quite understand, called the 7-member rule, were allowed sight of these emails in a closed room, and were able. Some of the staffers were able to transcribe the contents. I don't know how long they had, and so we now know what was said in these emails. And I'm afraid, it does raise very important questions. As I say, nothing wrong with these scientists speculating that this thing might have leaked from a lab. What's wrong is to then go out and write articles days later with no new information and say, we can rule out that possibility altogether, it's a conspiracy theory.
Well, and also effectively to rustle up a scientific paper ruling out the lab leak thesis. Now, the guys you just, so in other words, they're trying to lend, Fauci keeps saying, if you attack me, you attack science. Well, he was the guy who actually said, we need to get science, we need to get the authority of science to dismiss the lab leak thesis. Now, all these guys you mentioned on either side of the ocean, whether it's Fauci in Washington or Patrick Vallance in London, he's just been garlanded with a second knighthood for his public service during this thing. Are you surprised that these guys are still in office, given what appears to be prima facie evidence of a highly coordinated cover-up?
Well, I'm not here calling for heads to roll. That's not my job. But I am calling for a bit of transparency. We've got millions of people dead. hundreds of millions of people with their lives disrupted. And we are not being given transparency by the Chinese regime. We kind of expect that. But for Western scientists also to be refusing to reveal the details of their emails, and when those details come out, to reveal that they've been saying something completely different in private than they were saying in public, does seem to me to be seriously objectionable, and that this issue needs to be taken up by democratic means. What I think has gone wrong here is that science as a philosophy is fine. Let's apply logic, experiment, and falsifiability to the facts of the world and see where we end up. Science as an institution has become like the Catholic Church before the Reformation. Not entirely, of course it's not that bad, but there's a degree to which it's a priesthood defending its own interests, worried very clearly in this case about losing funding for some of this research, worried about its dependence on Chinese funding as well. The scientific journals don't come out of this story at all well, because they're basically ushering through any paper that says it's nonsense that it came out of a lab, and blocking any paper that says here's some evidence that it did come out of a lab. So again, it's the double standard that is unacceptable.
Are you surprised at the way US taxpayers are funding research at the Wuhan lab? In a sense, people were shocked by rendition during the Iraq war, where the CIA would grab some jihadists, take them to a so-called black site somewhere in Pakistan or somewhere else, where you can do to them things you wouldn't be able to do in the United States. Rendition, it became a big hate word to the left during the war. This seems to be a kind of form of scientific rendition, where you offshore certain kinds of dodgy scientific research to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, or whatever this Kazakh lab is now all about, because you can do things in China and in Kazakhstan that you wouldn't be able to do in a Western laboratory.
Well, one of the things that's been happening is that people in the West have been saying, well, hang on, if you've been funding this research, and this research has been turning up new viruses, then surely you have access to that data. And the EcoHealth Alliance, which is the foundation that gets US government money and spends it with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, among others, has said, no, the data is the property of the Chinese government. What? This is extraordinary. If the American government is paying for this research, then it should have access to the results. But it turns out it doesn't. And that, interestingly, just in the last 24 hours, there's a letter come from the National Institutes of Health to the EcoHealth Alliance saying in very strong terms, this is not good enough. You keep saying that you've paid for this research, collected these viruses, sent them to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and you now have no access to them. Why not? This is one of several ways in which you have a history of failure to comply with the conditions of your grant. That's a pretty well direct quote from their letter. Now, that's quite strong language, but it's not been accompanied by any diminution in the grants they give to the EcoHealth Alliance. They've given them a deadline of next week to get an answer out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology as to what's happened to this data that the American taxpayer has paid for. But it's, as you say, there's a degree of offshoring of intellectual property here that is really quite shocking, particularly when we need it to find out where this virus came from and therefore how to prevent the next pandemic.
Yeah, we all assumed for 2 years that it's because Peking leads a totalitarian state and it's natural for them to lie to the world. But the great shock in these emails is that a large number of prominent Western public health officials have taken on the characteristics of Chinese officials and are now also lying to the world. And the idea for, as you say, US taxpayers If they pay for this stuff, if it's and it winds up being done at Wuhan, they are still entitled to see the result. You live in the middle of Ohio and you lost your granny in the old folks' home to this thing, and it was actually your tax money that paid for it. I think that's something that guy in Ohio is entitled to know. Thank you very much, Matt Ridley. You always talk great sense on these things, and your book, Viral, is a sobering and terrific read. So we hope you'll stay on this thing. Written with Alina Chan, I should say, as well. Two co-authors who I don't think ever met until they finished the book. Sir Christopher Chope is the member for Christchurch, and he's going to have a word with us about Boris. Plus, Stump the Steyn, ask me anything you want at GB News via Twitter or gbviews at gbnews.uk. That's all straight ahead.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Well, I had my say on Boris Johnson and his troubles at the top of the show, but what do Tory members think? Because that is what's going to determine his future. Sir Christopher Chope is the member for Christchurch, and we're delighted to have him. Sir Christopher, you've been very critical of this government on all kinds of things, not least lockdown, and you've been very critical of Boris Johnson too. But you were almost effusive in your reaction to his statement today. Do you think he has put this thing to bed?
I don't think he's put it to bed, but I'm not sure I was effusive, but I was certainly relieved that we'd moved on from yesterday, when it seemed that there was going to be a refusal to discuss the issue of whether or not he was present on the 20th of May 2020. And the fact that he admitted today that he was present and then sought to explain the circumstances and was abject in his apology, I thought was progress. Whether it's sufficient progress, time will tell, not least when we get the outcome of the inquiry which he's set up, which I hope will be sooner rather than later.
This is by Sue Gray. This inquiry is being led by her, who I think, apart from a stint running a pub in Northern Ireland in the 1980s, has been a career civil servant. What I don't quite understand, though, is why it's the inquiry is taking her so long? I mean, these are parties. It's relatively easy to establish whether the parties took place and whether the Prime Minister was there and the conditions under which the parties were held. Is this just the usual Whitehall thing of kicking the can down the road till everyone's forgotten about it? Why has Sue Gray not reported back yet?
Well, I share your frustration because it should be quite a simple issue, and I would have expected, and I mentioned this in the Commons a couple of days ago, I would have expected that she would have looked at all the parties, so-called, and that the civil service would have known about other parties at number 10 and would have wanted to include them in the same inquiry stroke investigation. And it is, I think, very depressing, really, that it's taking so long and seems to be, well, is there an agenda to try and carry on deferring it? I hope there isn't. And it may be because the civil service itself is severely implicated in what has happened. So no, I share your scepticism, but on the other hand, we are assured that this is an independent person of integrity, and we must look to her to produce an independent result.
But as you said, this is an independent inquiry, so-called. But by someone who's been pals with all these big civil servants. This was the principal private secretary to the Prime Minister who issued this invitation. I find it very hard to believe that Sue Gray didn't know about that until she saw it on the front page of the newspapers. So again, I'm in Boris Johnson's political calculations. Would it be best for Sue Gray to report now and him to take the heat, or if she just is going to drag it out, won't more and more weird parties and gatherings emerge?
Well, I hope that we've now reached the end of this, and certainly the civil service must know about all the parties that took place at number 10. As I think a police officer has said, with all the security and the CCTV and all the rest of it, you can't really keep a party at number 10 secret. And so why don't we have a clean breast of all of this and have a very quick result? And I'm very disappointed about this because Boris's support in the country largely depends upon him having shown himself to be somebody who fights against the establishment. He fought against the establishment on Brexit and won, and that was the key to his success in the 2019 general election, because people who had been taken for granted in the so-called red wall seats, they suddenly found a different avenue for voting and supported Boris. And it's the suggestion that Boris is now beholden to the establishment and the civil service is sort of counterintuitive.
Well, it gets to the heart of his identity, as you've just suggested there, which is that he's this guy who found the persona of an Etonian bluffer and managed to make it connect with the working masses in northern England, and now it turns out he's like every other entitled old Etonian. He's a big toff and he doesn't care what the working folks. I mean, there's a heartlessness. This is the point Michael Portillo was making, that there's a lack of empathy with how ordinary Britons were living their lives during that period. I agree absolutely, and I think that is what is so serious about this. But of course, that lack of empathy and understanding was not just from the Prime Minister. It was from the whole of the Whitehall establishment, who've been carrying on doing lots of overseas travel. I mean, I know lots of ministers who never stopped travelling overseas with their entourages, while we were told that we couldn't walk down the road to have a cup of tea in our beach hut. I mean, it was
there does seem to have been an arrogance on the part of these people, which can be interpreted as contempt. And of course now that there's outrage in the country at what has happened. But all I'm saying is that it was refreshing today to hear the Prime Minister make this abject apology. And all I'm saying is let's hope that in the near future we're going to get an outcome to this inquiry, and then we can take it forward from there. But let's call for his resignation now, because that's not going to achieve anything.
Well, thank you for that, Sir Christopher Chope, the member for Christchurch, and we'll see what Sue Gray does have to say. Last night I was asked to weigh in on the current controversy roiling the realm, the question of whether with a scone one puts on the jam first or the clotted cream. And I said I put on the clotted cream and then the jam, and the world took it from there. This was John Moran on Twitter. Let's have a look at this. He said, that's not the one I wanted. He said the one way of doing it, I can't remember which way it was. It was one way was Devon and one way was Cornwall. And I don't want to get into any sectarian issues like that, just not familiar with it. It's like walking into a pub in Dundalk in 1984 and shouting, has Ian Paisley been in? So I don't want to get into the whole Cornish thing. I misspoke, as almost any political figure would say, as Boris may not say. I got confused. I don't actually put the clotted cream on and then the jam. I'll tell you what I do. I got it the wrong way round. I put a thin smear of jam on. Like if you're putting on I can't believe it's not butter. If they still have that. I don't really like I can't believe it's not butter. I always preferred I can't believe it's not butter, which is much better. But anyway, I'd always put a little bit of jam on and then the clotted cream. So I use the jam as a kind of margarine. So I want to correct that for all of you in Devon or Cornwall, as the case may be. Daz on Twitter says, were you at the Downing Street garden party? If so, what booze did you bring? I bought a bottle of pipi de marmotte. Do you know that? It's a French delicacy. The name comes from, I think it's basically groundhog urine is what they call it there. Pipi de marmotte. It's and it usually clears the room pretty quickly. Adam Gray says, why aren't salons recognised for government grants? We have also suffered terribly, like pubs and restaurants. So why? I think you're talking about hair and beauty salons, and I agree. I agree with you. If we're going to subsidise some industries, let's subsidise everything and at least go all over the cliff as spectacularly broke. Andy on Twitter says, should the BBC be defunded? Absolutely. It's not just the telly rubbish, but all the highbrow stations like Radio 3 and Radio 4, complete garbage these days. Do you think this is the beginning of the end to the royal family, says a Twitter user? No. The Queen is a wily old survivor. We're all out of time. See you tomorrow. You are in the best of hands for the next 2 hours. Dan Wootton is here to give it some Wednesday welly as only he can do. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello. Getting cold out there now. The sun has gone down. We'll keep largely clear skies across the south, but it will turn foggy in places, but also a frost likely across the south first thing in the morning, thanks to high pressure. Further north, notice quite a few isobars on the chart. It's been a windy day across northern Scotland. It stays windy here overnight, and that breeze will help to prevent a frost and will continue to bring quite a lot of cloud across certainly western Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England. Elsewhere though, clear skies, and especially in the south with the light winds, turning cold here.